All right, we're ready? Good to go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today, and welcome to IPD, to our last panel of the day. So for our next panel, we're going to take to the skies to talk about the future of transportation. For decades, movies and TV shows have predicted a future of flying cars, and now we're finally seeing this technology actually being built, which is super exciting. As we get closer to Jetson's reality, there will be numerous opportunities and challenges that we'll face. So our panel of experts today are going to talk about how their organizations are planning for this future. So I'm Jamie Boone. I'm the Senior Director of Government Affairs at the Consumer Technology Association. We have Danielle Burr, who's the Head of U.S. Federal Affairs for Uber. Michael Thacker, Executive Vice President of Technology and Innovation, it's a great title, at Bell. And Ariel Wolf, who is Counselor to the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Transportation. So thank you all for joining me today. This is such a fun and exciting topic. I think we can tell by the packed room, which is awesome. So before we get started, let's explain what we're talking about. There are a lot of different terms that are bouncing around this technology, from just robo-taxis or flying taxis to urban air mobility, to drones. So what are we talking about when we're talking about this technology? And just kind of explain a little bit, the differences between a drone, a helicopter, a flying taxi, and really just set the stage.
Sure, so I can take that to start if you want.
Sure.
So we prefer to talk about it as on-demand air mobility. And when we talk about that at Bell, we're really talking about the movement of people, goods, and data in the air, but really in a way that hasn't been done before. The idea of an air taxi exists today. You can do that in a helicopter in New York, LA, you can do it here. But it is relatively expensive, and it's relatively accessible to a few people, both because of the cost and because of the noise impact. What we're talking about here is a new class of vehicles using distributed propulsion, multiple rotors instead of a single rotor, to address both efficiency and noise. And the convergence of technologies of electric, hybrid, and distributed propulsion with the computational capability to manage and control that distributed system that both controls the aircraft and powers the aircraft. That convergence has allowed us a new class of vehicles that's never before existed to carry people and goods across the cities.
From an Uber standpoint, Uber Air is the actual product that riders will use when they press a button and get a ride. Right now that's happening on the ground, but in the future that'll happen in the air. We also talk about Uber Elevate, and that's the overall initiative that we're taking as a company as it relates to urban air mobility as well as it relates to drones, but again, all in the air.
Great. And Ariel, DOT, obviously has a big part and a lot to say in all of these.
From a government perspective, I agree with whatever they said and defined the technology.
We have this recorded.
That's right. That's right. No, maybe one additional point is just on the issue of automation in terms of distinctions between on the UAS side and the UAM. I think automation is a key point there because the expectation as you go to vehicles that'll carry people, the expectation is that there'll be a higher level of automation to avoid having people self-pilot as opposed to on the UAS side. So that might be one distinction to point out.
Sure. Now, Michael, you had a prototype at CES, which was a huge draw, which was really, really cool to see. But I believe when I looked in it looked like there was still a cockpit and a driver's seat.
So there is, and that really has to do with timing to market. The Nexus, it's that vehicle and a family of vehicles around it to move people and potentially goods down the road, will start piloted to be able to get into commercial service sooner. Part of that is public acceptance, part of that's regulatory acceptance, and part of that is continuing to demonstrate the reliability and robustness of the automation technology. However, the vehicle will be designed fully autonomous from the beginning. So it will be capable of full autonomy, and we will have the pilot in there again for developing the data set that will be required to satisfy the regulators, as well as to make sure that everybody in this room will be comfortable flying it.
Is that the same for Uber?
Yeah, Bell is one of the partners. We at Uber are creating the network that will allow individuals to push the button, get the ride. We are working with partners in the space, such as Bell, other partners globally, to design and build the actual eVTOLs in these vehicles. So it'll be our network that they operate on, but we're not going to be in the manufacturing side of it. Okay. We've talked with partners about the specifications, what it would look like, and we're talking about regulators on how you create the certification for said vehicles. But for our perspective, we are going to operate the network, that Uber Air, that these vehicles will operate on.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of the vision for what this new kind of transportation realm will bring us. Why is it important? Why do your companies, why does DOT see value in this?
Sure.
And just kind of frame out what the future looks like.
Sure, I'll take that to start. I mean, for Uber, we launched earlier this year a new motto, if you will, where we are igniting opportunity. And while we do that, we are really looking forward to the next phase of what those opportunities look like. Right now, it is the push of a button and a ride, but as we evolve on the ground from bikes and scooters to the air, and that deals with drones, and that deals with this urban air mobility concept. So for us, we think that it very much coincides with our mission. We also think that it can do great things for our community by creating more opportunities for individuals to get to and from places, to make our society more collaborative, to help even cities that are dealing with things like congestion and overcrowding. This helps seeks to solve some of those problems globally, not just here in the US.
So our vision, we've been changing the world through flight for over 80 years. Whether it's supporting the military service around the world, keeping the world free, whether it's emergency medical services. Bell has been creating vertical flight solutions that save lives and change the way the world works. We think that this is an opportunity to democratize aviation and make these benefits of aviation available to more people in more places. And as we look particularly at our cities, that are becoming more and more congested, there's really no ground-based solution that is going to address the issues that the cities are facing. And the trajectory of populations in cities continues to increase for the next decade. We don't see any stopping in that. It's where the opportunities are. We see this as an opportunity to make those cities more livable, to make trips across town that would become unavailable to people because of the time, the congestion, and frankly, the stress involved in that, more available to more people. So a big piece of this is not just the technology, but making the technology available to most people.
To put a finer point on it, if you think about the way cities looked at architecture generations ago, they went up to create more space, right? That's where we saw the building of skyscrapers. It's that same concept, and it is a lot less of a pressure on the infrastructure needs to go up, to go into the air. And so it's easier to do that than to build a bridge or a tunnel or more highways and roads.
Okay, and I definitely want to come back to the infrastructure point, but I'll give you
so
DOT jump in
So
first.
one, I certainly don't want to articulate a vision that's sort of distinct from the private sector itself. So what I would say is at DOT, we're tech neutral, really not positioned to say, oh, there should be this or there should be that. But in reacting to innovation and to development on this front, we see a lot of potential in solving the challenges that were enumerated a moment ago. Air ambulance services and last mile package delivery. A lot of it intersects with the benefits that we are examining in the IPP program, and so learning those lessons and translating them to the UAM context will be a process. But that's our position and our disposition. And we're reacting to it, and I think there's just a tremendous amount of potential. Also on the infrastructure side, of course, and congestion, all of those things are tremendously important from the DOT perspective, and putting out a lot of money to repair roads and bridges and things like that, and to the extent there are benefits there and cost savings, certainly look at that as well.
And just to add on to that, I don't think any of us see this as a mode of transportation that's going to replace ground transportation. This is to augment and enhance the overall system for everybody. Ground transportation is going to be around for a long, long time to come, and is a very important part of cities and communities and getting that package to the last mile piece. And as Danielle talked about, the idea in an Uber scenario is that it's a multimodal trip. You call up Uber and one of your options is Uber Air. Maybe it saves you an hour off of your hour-and-a-half trip. And you take a short ride to be able to get to the vertiport, you board the aircraft. The Nexus flies you across town and you get very close to your end location. Maybe you can walk there, but it's a multimodal transportation to get you where you need to go.
Thanks for that. Nice plug.
So let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. Obviously, taking vehicles off the road, there are less needs, but you still need a takeoff point and a landing point. And you still need that air traffic management and communication. So how is that all going to work? Are we going to, take off and land from existing buildings, private buildings? What's the thought process there?
For our vision, this is very much an ecosystem that we're trying to create. And as I talked about the partnerships we have on the manufacturing side, we as a urban air mobility conduit will have partnerships, and we already have partnerships on the real estate community side of things. And so we work very closely with those individuals who are creating and building those structures to be able to have them incorporated into city planning for the future. So I think that it's incredible to think about, as you can augment and just build one, and then you can build another, and just how quickly we can increase the usage of this. And I think that increased usage will only also increase the efficiency of it, but also decrease the cost of it. The more people that are using it, it's our goal that this would be, maybe initially at an Uber X kind of price per seat per mile, and then eventually as we scale to get down to an Uber X or even a pool price per seat per mile for each of these experiences.
So I think the key is it's not going to jump in overnight and be thousands of aircraft flying around a given city. So there are helipads around most cities today. And if you think about starting with tens of these aircraft, not hundreds of these aircraft, to begin the commercial operations using existing potentially helicopter routes and corridors in those cities, I think you can see a path to progress, and the infrastructure would come along. As Danielle said, there are real estate developers who are looking at building communities and having this be a part of a community as another economic center to drive the development, just like a sports complex or other pieces that they would add to a community might be, shopping areas and other things. So those conversations are ongoing. And then obviously communities, as they look at their infrastructure choices, will have an option. Do we repurpose a building, a parking lot, or do something on purpose to develop a vertiport, as opposed to going through the process of displacing hundreds of homes, businesses, et cetera, to put in a new highway or a new train, where the ground infrastructure can be really devastating to those communities in terms of the people who are immediately impacted by it.
The only thing I'll add is don't have a strong position other than as long as there's a vertiport on the top of my house to the top of DOT, avoid 16th Street in DC. I take no position whatsoever. But there are issues that that really don't intersect with on the federal government side on zoning and things like that, which from the federal government's perspective, would be relegated or dealt with, I should say, at the state and local level. But those are significant and important issues. It's not something that would really rise to the level that the federal government would have an intersection point with.
So what is the main focal point on this technology for DOT?
So for DOT, and it's worth mentioning here. Should have said it at the outset. I mean, the most important thing is safety, and it's important to note that I know all of our hearts are with the families of the Ethiopian Airlines flight, and that's an important issue for obvious reasons. Can't say more than that, but I know we're thinking about that. But it does frame every conversation, particularly this one, and then safety is the #1 priority. And the national airspace is the safest in the world, and it's the most complex, and it handles the most traffic in the United States. And that's something that we should be proud of, and we want to preserve that. And that's through the regulatory frameworks that we develop. And so the focus is on, there's been a lot on UAS and moving into UAM. Really, it's two things. One is, I think the bottom line message is on UAM that we DOT, FAA, are open for business. So there's an opportunity, a process in Part 135 to come forward, and the regulators are ready to work with companies to move forward there. And the second part of it is looking at it an incremental approach, and Michael, you were mentioning that earlier, kind of the stepwise approach. I think the vision is to look at it as what can we accomplish in the near term, and that would be existing infrastructure and piloted and things like that, and then the end state of thousands of eVTOLs flying around and incorporating that into the air traffic, and that's a different scenario. So I think trying to not there have been some discussions of trying to look at that grand vision at the end state. That's important, but we want to accomplish as much as we can in the near term, in the interim term, so that there can be benefits to consumers.
Right. So let's think about this. Let's take it really literally to the skies and talk about how we have a much higher number of users now using the national airspace. We have the traditional aviation, manned aviation, and we have all of these drones now. We have helicopters. How do we manage this airspace at different levels to make sure that they're all aware of each other, that there are no collisions or accidents, that this is done safely? Is this all integrated into our traditional airspace management, or is there something new created? Does it all work together?
So I think everyone will have an idea here, an opinion. That's kind of the incremental approach. In the near term, it'll be 400 feet below, kind of a segregated airspace type of model, I think is where things are headed. But again, that end state would be, in some fashion, fully integrated. But that is a very complex undertaking that is being looked at closely. There's a pilot program, I think the UPP, and that's a central question. But again, in the near term, I think we want to find a way to take that segregated airspace approach to allow for some limited operations in the coming years.
So in addition to the US IPP, there's also a NASA program that is in partnership with the FAA called the System Integration Operationalization Project. Bell is partnered in that, and it is to help develop the low altitude airspace management system and help understand how we mitigate the safety risks in the system across vehicle operations and airspace. And that's what we do today, but with a piloted system, with the kinds of technologies we operate primarily in fixed wing aircraft, that safety record is outstanding, and we have to maintain that level of safety outcome. We might mitigate the safety risks differently across those three areas of vehicle operations and airspace with this new class of vehicles. And that's really the conversations that we're having with the FAA and the Department of Transportation is, let's maintain that safety outcome. How do we allow ourselves within the construct and framework of the regulations and policies to be able to do that a little bit differently than we have historically, but still get the same great safety outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the safety outcome can't be reiterated more. That's really, I think there's something that it's fundamental to the ability for us all to operate in this space is to have those confidences and those in the safety. And so working in the ecosystem isn't just with Uber and the private sector, but that ecosystem obviously includes NASA, it includes FAA, it includes our state and local partners. And so that's just something that we're really excited about partnering and really creating that ecosystem, because there's a lot of unanswered questions. And I think as the point was made earlier, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is something that's going to be incremental. It's going to see pilots, it's going to see learnings, and we're going to probably, try things a couple different ways. But we want to be successful and we want to be safe, and I think that those are really important components.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about these really starting off in cities. Is that the vision for everybody, that we start in cities? What are the opportunities for rural America to make sure that they have these same opportunities to utilize, especially when they're traveling further distances?
Yeah, I would just say for Uber, we announced back last year that we were going to pilot in 2 U.S. cities. We're going to announce a 3rd international city probably later this year. Those 2 cities are LA and here in Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area. And part of the reason for doing that is because of the reasons that we articulated before. The high congestion, the real need for these consumers to be able to have access to these types of things so they can change the way residents are moving in and around the cities. As we get towards more learning, as we expand the network, I think you'll see more opportunities in a rural environment, whether that is things like healthcare opportunities and things like that. But again, even the transportation opportunity that exists to get to your airport that's 3 hours away presents a real great opportunity for folks in rural America.
Absolutely.
And I would say for Bell, our vision from the beginning has extended a bit further. We think the cities and the urban mobility opportunity is tremendous, but we also think that some regional connectors of city to city are a great opportunity and something that will make a lot of sense. And particularly on the transportation of goods, perhaps for people, the connection of distribution center to distribution center, distribution center to store, potentially offshore to onshore. There are some tremendous opportunities there for the movement of cargo, and that probably actually can happen sooner to help demonstrate the technology, because the movement of goods and the movement of people are not quite the same. And certainly doing it over a less populated area also reduces the level of risk and allows us more opportunity to operate.
I totally agree. In the intermediate warehousing efficiencies that can be achieved on the package side, and that their benefits then overlap with the benefits that are achieved on the urban side on reduced strain on the road infrastructure that we talked about earlier, and even traffic accidents and those reductions. So there are some overlaps, but I think on the medical side, I think that's probably the number one thing that people are looking at as being the benefit, both on delivery of medicines and services on the package side, but also just air ambulance services potentially. That's a tremendous benefit on the rural communities.
Yeah, and frankly, even the delivery of blood, organs, and other critical medical supplies, not necessarily the transport of somebody who was in an accident, which we do with helicopters today, but the urgent, timely need to be able to get something, let's say, to a crisis area where a flood or a hurricane, something else has happened, and we need to get a lot of medical supplies in. It could be a very fast way to do that, and get it right to the point of need.
Absolutely. So Ariel, I want to talk a little bit about where the FAA is now in a couple of rulemakings for drones that obviously is going to have a huge tie to what this industry does as well. You have, a role for to allow flight over people, which is obviously going to be essential if you're moving in cities. Operating at night, operating beyond visual line of sight. The industry has been working on these for several years now. I think have had a really good partnership with the FAA and the industry. What is the status of those? Where do we stand, and how long until those are ready to go?
So that's the big question. We're currently in the comment period for those two rules you mentioned, Jamie, on the operations over people, or ops over people, small UAS, and the safe and secure. The safety and security of small UAS. And the former, on ops over people, that's an NPRM, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, which indicates that it's, exactly what it says, but it's a proposal for an actual rulemaking that we're expecting to get comments and then alter it, but it would be in its that's the presented form based on the comments. I say that because the other one is an ANPRM, an Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and the posture there is really to ask some questions about the safety and security of small UAS, and not to put forward the framework or the frame of a regulation, and to solicit input from the entire stakeholder community. Both of those have comment periods that close on April 14th. And the key point there has been made clear, is that neither of them are going to become final rules, and particularly in the operations over people, until, I would say unless and until, but I'm going to say until the rule on remote identification is finalized. That's really the critical component here that's been outstanding for a while, and continues to be an ongoing discussion. It's technically difficult, and I would imagine co-panelists know a lot more about what's been going on with that. But that's the timing of it. So that's going to have to get solved, and then everything else comes together into what is ideally the next phase of integrating UAS into the airspace.
And for folks that aren't familiar with the remote identification issue, can you give just a quick overview of what that is, why that's so important, and why everything else is kind of waiting and riding on that? And if anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe you guys have more backstory on it. So it's the component of being able to identify UAS, and that's the ability there is to separate on the security side. So we know we can manage the UAS that have been identified through whatever system is put in place, and then that follows a set of rules. But then, importantly, those that lack identification, there's a security and counter UAS component to that the security agencies are rightly very concerned about. And so being able to separate out the traffic that is acceptable and we know and follows the rules and may deviate and has to abide by those rules, and that regime versus what could be on the security, the national security and the danger side, that's really kind of the threshold issue. So there are probably other details that you guys, I don't know.
I would say from our perspective, coming from an aviation producing of certified aircraft, the identification piece is kind of in the nature of what we would do. And any of the aircraft that we would be building, whether for the delivery of goods or services or moving people, we would intend to have the same sorts of communication, identification, and safety technology that we have on the rest of our vehicles. So for smaller UAS, I understand the challenge, particularly having grown up with a little bit less restrictions around it. Not all of the aircraft have the identification technology within them, and weight-constrained, very light vehicles, it's very difficult to get that into a very, very small aircraft and manage both the energy and the weight cost of doing that. So that's the challenge for the small UAS. But for larger ones, it's a part of the nature of what you do to get a certified aircraft.
Michael, you've had a really long history working in the aviation space. How is this
Are you saying
UAM?
old?
No, that's not it. Lots of great rich experiences. So how is this different than what you've worked on in the past? How is UAM different?
Yeah, so just I've been working in the industry for well over 20 years. Most of my background is in general aviation, business aviation. Fixed-wing aircraft. I moved to rotorcraft a few years back, and frankly, a part of the excitement about working for Bell is the fact that we really do have the opportunity to have an inflection point change in an industry that, while it does great things, and it's amazing to make any aircraft fly. I mean, if you're in the business, that is one of the things that this business can offer that no other business can. When you see something that you have worked on fly for the first time, there's an internal satisfaction that you get no other way. It's just amazing. But this is an opportunity, much like the transition to the jet age, where we have a convergence of technologies that literally open up configuration opportunities that people have dreamt about and drawn down on paper for decades, but haven't been able to execute because the technology wasn't available. Now it is. And now the real question, excitement is, what all can we do with it? And it has the opportunity to really bring the benefits of aviation to more people. And I love to fly, and I want more people to love to fly. That's the opportunity we have.
Great. So I saw something the other day, I think it was Boeing that put it out, but that they expected to see these urban air vehicles take off before self-driving vehicles. So I'm curious, especially Danielle, you working on both and advocating for both, but really for each of you, just curious, what your predictions are, what you think of that.
I learned a long time ago not to make predictions, and I'm not going to acquiesce to that at this moment in time. But as I talked about before, at Uber, we believe in igniting opportunity through movement, and whatever that form of movement is, if it's a scooter, if it's a bike, if it's an autonomous vehicle, if it is an eVTOL. And so we're exploring all of them, and I would not make a prediction about one over the other, but I think that we have announced that it's our intent to try and pilot some of these eVTOLs as early as 2020 for testing. And so it's there, it's out there. It's an ambitious goal, and it's one that we, as a company, we make big, bold bets, and we're going to continue to try and achieve it. But to the points that have already been made, this is something where we need to have good testing, we need to have good safety standards. All of those conditions need to be met before we can go out and test it. So we look forward to achieving that goal, but we're certainly not going to risk anything by not if we don't.
So I won't necessarily make a prediction either, but I will say, from an aviation perspective, we do have some distinct advantages in that on the ground system, we have millions of vehicles already in the ground being driven by people. And now you try to integrate in a set of logical instructions that behave in a certain way that isn't necessarily the same logic that's being used by all the other vehicles around them that are being driven by people.
Are you saying people are bad drivers?
I didn't say that. There are some, but there are a lot of good drivers out there too. For aviation, we have the opportunity that the airspace is already relatively well controlled. Aircraft in general know where other aircraft are. As we go forward and we continue to put equipment on board to make sure that the aircraft and the ground control stations know where the aircraft are, that provides you with some additional level of safety. And then the fleet management opportunity is that we don't have millions and millions of aircraft flying about the city and the country. So as we progress in, and you start with the existing infrastructure of aircraft going in and out of airports and helicopters moving around controlled corridors, and now we add to that, we have the opportunity to add in a controlled way that is much more difficult on the ground.
So on the question of AVs versus UAM, probably should be the last person to opine on what comes first. But what I would say is it's an interesting tie-in to what Secretary Chow was talking about earlier today. We don't take a position on that, or that's not what the government does. But what we do need to do is prepare and adapt the institutions of government, in this case, Department of Transportation, to accommodate new technologies that don't neatly fit into the departmental silos that were created in 1967. And that's not to put down basic rail, highways, passenger vehicles, motor carriers, and things like that. That remains the bedrock of transportation systems in the country. But when we talk about UAM, tunneling projects that you may have heard about, Hyperloop and things like that, we have seen. These are not hypothetical questions. We are now being faced with directly companies and stakeholders and states and local governments asking, who do we talk to? How do we work on this construct? And we don't know the answer. So the Secretary is moving forward to create a mechanism to deal with that. I think UAM right now and UAS does fit within the FAA construct, but you look at some of the technology and some of the questions, particularly maybe even on the power systems, where NHTSA might be better positioned to lend expertise. How do we leverage that expertise from across the department for these types of new technologies? That's what we want to be focused on from DOT. And then that way, whatever technology is going to be moving forward, they're all moving forward at the fastest way possible, consistent with maximum safety.
And kudos to the Secretary for creating that, was it announced today, the task force and the technology task force. I mean, I think that as we talk about this ecosystem, we talk about the stakeholders and the partners, we need a department that's forward-looking on this. And so I think we all really were welcoming that, and obviously welcome our participation however we can lend it.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there are opportunities even within the DOT to look at the construct of how the department provides regulation and oversight to different transportation segments today, and take some lessons learned to maybe streamline some of the opportunities, particularly in aviation. You mentioned NHTSA, and obviously there's some different constructs in terms of how the oversight is performed, and I think some crossbreeding of that could be helpful for everybody.
Yeah.
We're all about healthy discussion, certainly.
So from CTA's perspective, and we very much appreciate the Secretary and the Department's approach to being technology neutral. She says it all the time. It's about enabling innovation, and that's something that we really take very seriously and very much appreciative. So I won't push you on the one over the other. I didn't really expect anyone to give me a real answer on that one. But for fun, let's do a quick audience poll. Put up your hand if you think that self-driving vehicles, cars on the ground, will be first. Okay.
Yeah.
All
There's
right.
some on the road.
Fully self-driving, like level 5 fully self-driving. Okay, and VTOLs. Okay, we're going over sticking with the roadways for now. Okay, that was fun. Thanks, guys. Thanks for humoring me.
Some undecideds out there.
Yes.
Yeah, there's
I
definitely.
think a different technology.
There were some non-participators out there. Maybe you just
Non-voters.
Everyone's holding a drink, maybe. All right, so let's talk a little bit. We've talked a lot about DOT and their approach. On Capitol Hill, we've seen some self-driving bills over the past couple of years, some drone bills, and also drones were addressed in this latest FAA bill. Where is Congress on all of this? Are they paying attention? Are they talking about this yet?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the head of Uber Elevate, Eric Ellison, was actually testifying before House committee today on this. And we know, what does transportation look like in 2025? And so I think there's a recognition that our legislative and regulatory environment right now is not necessarily in the place where it needs to be for these new technologies to grow. So I think Congress is looking at the issue. I think Congress recognizes that there are challenges. I think Congress is also looking to the regulatory body to help create that environment. So I think they're interested in it. We've had great experiences and good dialogues, and I think a lot of people get really excited when we talk about this technology, and I think they're trying to learn. And so I give them credit for learning right now and not trying to act too quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, along those same lines, Eric and I also had the opportunity to testify before the House Science and Technology Subcommittee last year, and it was exactly that. They were looking to learn about, in this case, they titled the discussion "Flying Cars." We actually weren't talking about flying cars and the fact that our vehicles are not transitioning from ground-based to the air, but our air vehicles in a multimodal system. But they were trying to learn about what is this, how is it going to change things, what should we be concerned about, what do we need the Department of Transportation to be looking at to make sure that we have the appropriate level of safety, but we also get out of the way and let innovation happen.
Yep.
And so I think Congress is engaged. There was language that the congressional offices put into the recent FAA reauthorization that specifically addresses some of these items, and also is intended to set up a chairman level committee specifically to look at aviation issues as well for system oversight and certification that I think will give us an opportunity to continue the dialogue. So I think Congress is definitely interested and involved. Like with everything, we would all like it to move faster, but we have their attention.
We at DOT have nothing but respect and admiration for the legislative branch and look forward to their thoughts on these matters.
So we talked a lot about the opportunities and the excitement around this. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges. What challenges are companies currently facing? What do you see as kind of the biggest hurdles in really moving this technology forward?
I think for us, as we talked about a little bit already, is the vehicle certification and kind of where these vehicles will be certified by the FAA, how they will be certified. And part of those decisions really need to be made in order for our partners in the manufacturing space to move forward with their models. And so I think that's one thing that we probably need to come to sooner rather than later from a regulatory standpoint. But again, I think we're having good discussions. I think folks recognize that there is something different that we need to look at. So we're encouraged. But if I had to pick one thing, that's the thing right now that we would need to see action on to continue to move forward.
So I would probably pick a couple of things. One of them is community engagement. Obviously implementing these systems into a city, as we mentioned before, it's not just federal policy, but local policy as well with regard to permission to take off and land. Getting the cities and the communities to see and believe that it's going to be a different level of noise and activity within the city, and to understand that there's a benefit to everybody in the city, not just a select few. That's one piece that I think will be one of the critical paths for getting these products and these systems into commercial use. The other one in my mind is less about the vehicle certification. While that is important, frankly, I think that's probably further along from a regulatory perspective than really understanding the integrated approach across vehicle operations and airspace, particularly for the fully autonomous future. I think there's a lot more work to be done, and to hit the kind of direct operating costs that we want to get to so that the price per mile can come down, we really do, at least within the cities, need to be moving towards electric and moving towards autonomous to be able to get it so it's more accessible to more people.
I jotted down some of the key challenges. It's hard to really choose which one. And again, those of you in the front lines of the technology know, but I mean, we talked about airworthiness. One interesting one is certifying the autonomous software, and this really me speaking, not conversations with DOT, but where does the expertise reside in the government to be able to evaluate software from the perspective of safety? Certainly it exists and it's being done, but as complexity increases, I think that's something to pay attention to, detect and avoid. the infrastructure issues, the security, like TSA screening type issues, is just one of the things that has to get worked out. And public acceptance, is Michael, as you were saying, is key. Noise and other types of things has to be tackled. I know the Secretary's mentioned a number of occasions on the AV side. That's something that really much more attention needs to be focused on the part of industry to look at public acceptance. So same thing in this context.
So we'll do one more question, then I want to save some time for audience questions because I think we're going to have a lot of interest in that. So let's talk about the U.S. versus international. I think Dubai seems very much to be very leading forward on this technology and using it. Is the main focus the U.S.? Is the U.S. going to be first? Do we see other countries having an easier time with this than we will?
I mean, I think that we announced 2 domestic cities at the start of our pilot program, and those, like I said, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Los Angeles. We do want to have a third city that will be an international city, and we hope to make that announcement as Uber probably by the summer as to what that third international city will be. I think that we have as we talked about, some of the safest and most highly regulated airspace in the country, in the world, and so operating here makes sense. I think we would like to try and make sure that it happens domestically first.
So, aviation is a global business, and we certainly have seen interest worldwide in the Nexus and in the autonomous pod transport, which is our logistics family of vehicles. And we've announced a partnership to study the logistics system with Yamato, which is the largest package logistics company in Japan, to help understand how the autonomous pod transport could improve the efficiency of their operations and allow them to provide better service to their customers. So we're working domestically with folks like Uber, cities like Dallas, Fort Worth, but we also have a lot of interest internationally as well. I think from a Bell perspective, the safety, can you get there first because somehow you don't have to reach the same threshold? That's not of interest to us at all. The safety is a starting point for Bell. It has been. We understand that for aviation in particular, safety is paramount because if you're not, then the business will cease to exist. And so for all of us, for everybody who's even looking to get into this space, we need to have that expectation that safety is going to be at the level of the system today or higher. And so wherever we do it worldwide, that'll be the case for Bell. But we do see opportunities globally.
And on the global side, there are a number of good pilot projects and deployments. And there's a lot of I've been made aware of good information sharing with FAA and DOT on these types of things. So it's positive in that respect. But like Danielle and Michael were talking about, the integration into the U.S. regulatory framework, I mean, it's not just the challenge, but it's the opportunity because of it's the gold standard. Being able to do that means that you've achieved something. You got into that. You've achieved that milestone and can proceed towards the end state. In other contexts, it's just a different environment. And again, there's a lot to learn from those things, and we want to. But from FAA's perspective, DOT's perspective, it's about leveraging the existing regulations to make incremental progress, so we could get to that full integration. Hopefully, that's possible in the near term.
Okay, great. Audience questions. Okay.
So I don't know if
And
I'm the
we actually have a mic, so just 1 second. There you go.
I don't know if this is the elephant in the room, but how much do y'all expect to estimate a cost of taking an air taxi, an Uber unmanned aircraft?
So for an Uber perspective, the network that we're working through this will all come to scale, right? But our initial models suggest if we get everything right, we get the energy components to this right, we're able to get the skyports at places where there is usage cases. We'd like to probably start at kind of your UberX per mile pricing per seat per mile. So it would be very similar to a cost of taking, I'm sorry, an Uber Black at that initial phase. As we scale, as we grow, you could very much see this at the UberX level pricing per seat per mile. So it is something that we would like to be able to make affordable and accessible to all. It's not something that we are looking to make something for 1% of the population, and that's why we believe the urban air mobility and the kind of network that Uber operates on the ground is applicable on the air, and we can create at scale a really affordable opportunity.
So I do think that scale is really important. It'll start off being less than helicopters are today, substantially less in the sense that even with the pilot, as you move to more efficient electric and hybrid electric systems and the simpler systems that go with that from a propulsion perspective, you get some reduction in the overall cost of the vehicle to operate. So you're able to pass that on to the end customer. As you get to scale and as you're able to go fully autonomous, you're able to take additional costs out of the system that allow you to drive that price down to much lower values.
Hi, I'm Tim. Great panel, I must say. I know that Bell is here as a representative of the producers of eVTOLs, but I also know that there are at least between 20 and 30 other companies working on this right now. So I was wondering, could you comment a little bit about what are the most interesting and promising eVTOLs out there from around the world?
Do you want to talk about that? I mean, I can talk about our partners. We have a lot of other partners.
So I would say the most interesting ones are the Bell ones.
Yeah, sure. Hope so.
The Nexus and the Apps family.
Yep.
You can look them up, CES, tons of media about it. You can see inside and out, so take a look.
Bell is a great partner of ours. Happy to be sitting here next to Bell. There are others in the space that we are also working with, companies like Pipistrel, companies like, who else, Kareem Aircraft. There are global companies that we're looking to work with on the manufacturing side.
Any other questions? Really? Okay, there we go.
It's a comprehensive panel.
I guess so.
I'm an investor in another one of those companies that's not Bell, that's talking to Uber, so full disclosure. I was talking to the CEO today about coming to this, and one of his concerns is China being far ahead of us because of U.S. regulatory policy. So is that something that worries us at the government level? I know the task force is great progress, but if we don't have that, are we going to be at a disadvantage to other countries in this space?
So it's a good question, but I think the answer to that is no, we don't feel like we're at a disadvantage or we're going to miss out on something. Again, I think the key point is that if you look at the amount of traffic that's handled in the U.S., and it's been said many times, and I'm sure you know this, is it's really what we have here is the gold standard. And so integrating new kinds of operations like UAM and UAS into this system, it may, on the front end, be more challenging and take a little bit longer, but once that's done, it's something that's potentially far beyond the complexity that can be achieved elsewhere. And so it's not a race to who can get the first commercial UAM, someone flying to and from here and there. It's about how can we get to that end state and how do we make incremental progress. So I think the kernel of concern of what you're saying is that we really do have to focus on making incremental progress. And that really is something that we need to lean in on and be vigilant about on a daily basis. It's something we're constantly focused on and identifying ways, okay, we've got the IPP, we've got the UTM and other initiatives. How do we get lessons learned? How do we make sure that that's pushed out and incorporating that and getting out to stakeholders and learning more? So we really do have to be doing that, but it's going to be incremental as opposed to you'll see other places might get to the next phase, but it's just not going to be as complex. So
from an industry perspective, I think there is some sense of urgency about being able to move along, and I think that we're conveying that. You're seeing some action out of the FAA and the DOT to move forward. I think the biggest piece of it is opening up the ability to test in real operating environments, and we're seeing progress in that direction, but we need to see more progress in the ability to move from completely rural locations and missions, but missions that are representative, not missions that are real, to progressing to the ability to actually do a real mission, taking blood from one hospital to another to demonstrate the capability of doing that autonomously within a city. Those sorts of things are the things that we need to move out quickly to be able to stay ahead of the international competition. And China's one, but frankly, we should be talking about Europe as well. And the biggest opportunity, I think, from a regulatory standpoint we have with Europe is we need to make sure that the US and Europe are staying aligned in terms of where they're headed with the end state, because the last thing we need is for them to take different directions and then us have multiple rule sets to try to work with.
I'll just maybe say one other thing, and that is none of this works if there's no public acceptance. And so the reason why it needs to be deliberative and incremental is because just this safety has to be the most critical aspect that's focused on here. And so that's why I think there's an understanding on part of the public here that if it's done the same way, not the same way, but with the same attention to safety here, that you would be able to achieve a level of public acceptance that may or may not be possible if you were to rush and skip to the next phase. So I think that's key if it's going to be scalable and all of that.
Okay, one more question.
If we look at cost, and we look at VERTOL versus a traditional roadway wing, and we look at transporting goods versus people, are you going to segregate those out because of the cost of operation of the individual aircraft and air travel?
So I would say right now we have two families of vehicles. One family is very specifically targeted towards logistics and moving goods and moving data. The Nexus family is capable of both. It's designed initially around primarily the movement of people, but it can move goods as well. And there are some advantages to using it to move goods in certain scenarios, and certainly for larger volumes and payloads of goods. So like any other aircraft, you design for a specific set of missions, and that set of missions ends up driving a set of requirements along with the regulations that drive you into a relatively confined space of what actually works with the technologies that are available.
Can you separate out the two? Which one is more costly?
Which one is more costly?
Yeah, you take a traditional VERTOL and you take a traditional rotary wing.
So I think the answer is you can, but the costs are different. So a traditional rotorcraft has very complex gear and rotor system that are high precision, high cost, and they typically have a life limit on them, so they have to be replaced over a period of time. When you replace that drive system with an electric propulsion system, no matter where the power comes from, you're now using electric motors and in most cases direct drive. And that simplification has a cost associated with it that allows you to operate at a lower cost. Now, the automation and the control system required to manage that versus the other is also different. So there may be more upfront costs and less operating costs, if that helps.
Thank you. All right, unfortunately, we are out of time. I know this is a fascinating topic and one that we could spend a lot more time on, but I want to thank our panelists for joining me today. This was so much fun.
Thanks for having us.
And I want to just thank you all for joining us today. We have such an amazing group of experts talking about robotics and AI and self-driving, or self-flying cars. Really, these conversations are so important, and we really want to thank all of the government guests that joined us today. That conversation between industry and government is so important to making sure that we get the policies right to realize these technologies. So thank you all for being here. Innovation Policy Day 2019, I think, was a huge success. Follow us on Twitter at CTA Tech, and let's continue the conversation. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks.